On today's show, Kevin Durant has requested a trade, and while half the league has already called the Brooklyn Nets, there aren't many teams that could really pull off a deal. We'll get into the most realistic trade destinations for KD, plus a rapid start to free agency that saw a lot of deals get done. We'll get to some of our favorites, all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to a Friday edition of Locked On NBA, your daily podcast on the NBA. However you may be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with Adam Mares. On today's show, Jalen Brunson is on his way to the Knicks, and the Lakers are taking a different approach to building around LeBron and Anthony Davis. But first, Kevin Durant took the NBA offseason and just set it on fire, Adam. Hours before the start of free agency, we got reports that Durant has requested a trade from Brooklyn. Before we get to where he may end up, what does this say about the Nets and their super team experiment and where they go from here?
I mean, it was a failure. Of course, that's one thing it says about it. It was not just a failure, it was a disaster. What it doesn't say that's more interesting to me is that it's the end of super team era. We see a failed super team in Brooklyn, maybe just leading to multiple super teams elsewhere. Once again, perhaps in Los Angeles, maybe down in Phoenix as well. But, it's so clearly a disaster how it's worked out. It looked like Brooklyn wanted out of the Kyrie, and even if that meant KD situation, it sounds like KD wanted out of the Kyrie situation. It sounds like everybody wants out of everything. So to me, it was an absolute failure. And the fact that we have Kevin Durant personally asking Joe Tsai for a trade the day of free agency, it just shows what a disaster, the degree of which a disaster this was.
Yeah, I mean, you still bring in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving 10 times out of 10 if they just want to walk into your cap space. And you can't blame the Brooklyn Nets for doing that. But, I think we're getting to a point. You mentioned that the super team era is kind of dead here. And look, I think player agency is good. More control over where these guys get to play. I think that's good. It's good for them. They deserve it. They're the best of the best, whatever. But I think when that control spills over into how other people do their jobs, that's not good anymore, right? When you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving calling the shots on the coaching staff, who the head coach is, personnel moves, like they have agency over where they play because they're the best at what they do, right? They're some of the best players in the NBA, but they're not the best coaches in the NBA. And Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are not some of the best GMs in the NBA. Right. And it seems like they wanted to do their jobs too. And that's where I think that this player agency and all this stuff, even when you're getting superstar players like KD and Kyrie, that's when the diminishing returns start to creep in, and you get this. You get just this absolute disaster where you had the Nets front office realizing that control had completely been taken away from them. They try to wrestle it back. Bridges are burned, and now you lose the players that you spent all these resources to get in the first place.
I mean, building an NBA champion is so hard. It's one of the hardest things to do because it's got to be a balance between the talent, the chemistry, the buy-in, everybody pulling in the same direction, from ownership to front office and management to coaching staff to players to everything. Like, all of these things are so delicate. And when one of those gets thrown out of balance, you can have a lot of talent and it makes up for those margins being bad. Maybe your chemistry isn't great. Maybe the buy-in isn't great, but you know what? The talent is so overwhelming. But when those things fall so far out of whack to where there is an imbalance in that, and maybe even an unappreciation for the various different roles within an organization and how they all lead to winning, you get an example like what you have in Brooklyn, which was so clearly the case. And it's tough. The Kevin Durant part of all of this is so fascinating because he's coming from what I consider to be the greatest sort of organization in the modern NBA with the Golden State Warriors, a great co-star and supporting cast in Steph Curry and the rest of the Warriors, and didn't like that. Went somewhere else, gets the taste of the exact opposite of that. It's a disaster. And it just shows you just how, I guess, tenuous all of this is.
Yeah, I mean, the organizations matter. The people that do their jobs, that all that stuff matters. You mentioned how hard it is to build a champion. It's more than just Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving going to a team and just doing their Rucker Park thing. Like, that's not That's not good enough in today's NBA. It's just so hard. It is so hard, and I think that's the lesson learned with Brooklyn.
Can I say something though? We all during the pandemic watched The Last Dance, and we got the education of the Jerry Krause versus Michael Jordan thing through the eyes of Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the framing of this is almost as if you have a general manager who thought he was better than he was and didn't respect the player, this or that. What the truth was is that you had a general manager that put together a winner and a player who was by far the most important player in the history of basketball that helped them, that led them to win those. The lesson is that both sides mattered. Did one side think that they were too important? Maybe both sides thought they were too important, but both of them did things. And I think, and it's just kind of funny the way that narrative was told, obviously through the eyes of Michael Jordan, who had final edit on how it was told, but also how it was consumed from everybody watching it, just almost taking it at face value. Yeah, that's right. And I think we're just watching things play out in Golden State, watching things play out in Brooklyn, and watching smaller versions of this all across the league and going, it probably is a collaboration amongst an entire organization.
Well, let's look at what Kevin Durant does next here, because now we have reports that already half the league has called Brooklyn. It's probably more than that by now. Kevin Durant listing Phoenix and Miami as his preferred destinations. Now, obviously, the Brooklyn Nets don't have to trade Kevin Durant to Phoenix or Miami, but he does have some agency in this, right? It kind of feels like, yeah, they are going to trade him despite the fact that he has 4 more years left on his deal, that they're ready to kind of move on from this experiment. Wow. The interesting thing to me about this and trying to figure out where it is that Kevin Durant is going to land, there's 2 different interests that need to be satisfied, right? But they're the same thing. You have Durant wants to be competitive wherever he goes next, and the Nets want to remain competitive for a lot of different reasons. But
do they want to
that's the
remain
bottom
competitive?
Line. Well, they don't have any of their own draft picks because of the James Harden trade, which another knocked that one out of the park. Because all of them are owed to Houston. So there's no use in tanking. It kind of feels like if you're going to move Durant, you want to get some good players back. Like, I don't think you just want a bunch of – you obviously probably want to replenish your draft picks, but it's Kevin Durant. You can get the draft picks. You can get the good players. You can get all of it for Kevin Durant, or you should be able to at least. And so, like, the destinations where Durant could stay competitive, and it's not like a Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks situation where they have to completely gut the team to get him, and where you're getting a return – as Brooklyn, that you could get some good players back and still remain competitive. That middle part of the Venn diagram is not very big, Adam. And so I don't know how this ends up or what kind of deal we end up seeing for Kevin Durant.
I mean, you also wonder, like, I think we're all sitting here checking our phones. It's going to happen any second. It's going to happen any second. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, this is also part of your negotiation, as we have seen with James Harden in the past, hardball with Ben Simmons in the past, that sometimes that initial wave sets a price. You wait a while, price goes down. You wait even further, price goes back up again. And maybe we get into a situation, I hope not, because I do not enjoy when the conversation around basketball is not around basketball, but around what player is sort of holding an organization hostage or vice versa. But I mean, that's Kevin Durant is that caliber of player, and his contract is such, having the 4 years left, him being in his relative prime still, that this is such unprecedented territory that if you're Brooklyn, you owe it to yourself to make sure you get the best value, not just the first value. So we'll see. I do think, if you mentioned the 2 teams, though, Miami and Phoenix should be mentioned. Both were 1 seeds last year in their respective conferences, which is kind of hilarious.
It's the Kevin Durant special, man. Like,
he's got a type. He definitely has a type. Obviously, as somebody with a team in the West and the Denver Nuggets, Phoenix is a terrifying option. That seems like a really great fit. And there's a centerpiece of that trade, DeAndre Ayton, that makes the most sense. Although I'm not sure, can Ayton be signed and traded? I think there might be like that might not be possible.
Well, yeah, you have like the base year compensation thing, and obviously at hard caps Brooklyn, if you acquire DeAndre Ayton, and by the way, the other part of that is if another team like kind of swoops in and offers DeAndre Ayton, like if the Pacers swoop in and give DeAndre Ayton an offer sheet, doesn't that sort of tie it up? And now Phoenix can't really do anything with it, other than match it, I guess, and then try to move them. But there's some stuff there. I'm sure that these front offices, if Kyrie Irving hasn't fired the entire Brooklyn Nets front office by now, I'm sure they could figure it out, some of the calculus there. But if I'm Brooklyn, I don't know that DeAndre Ayton at $40 million a year of whatever it's going to be is great for me. Like DeAndre Ayton he's a good player. I don't know that that's like the rebuilding piece that I want next to Ben Simmons and all this stuff. I don't know. I don't know what Brooklyn's really looking for. I mean, if you put Michael Bridges in there, that's a nice piece. I don't know. I think a lot of what's so interesting to me about this is like the on paper offers. Like there's going to be a million of them. Memphis, they could throw a million, like $10 million to $15 million good young players at Brooklyn. Be like, here's a bunch of guys. You can kind of just be like what you were before you got Kevin Durant. It's a bunch of really good, culture oriented young players who play hard. I don't know where that leaves Memphis with just Kevin Durant and Ja Morant potentially. I don't know. I don't know if that's interesting to Brooklyn. With Miami, the other team, like they can't move Bam Adebayo to Brooklyn because Ben Simmons and Bam Adebayo are both on, 5-year rookie extensions, and you can't trade for two of those players on one roster. So does Bam get moved to a third team? What does that look like? Now you're jumping through all these hoops. Is Tyler Hero and a bunch of other stuff enough to get it done? I don't know.
By the way, I kind of believe, and this is even from talking to some people, I kind of believe that there was a little shock value to the Kevin Durant situation. I think everybody kind of looked around and said, hey, this could be a possibility. I mean, let's keep an eye with the Kyrie news. Maybe he leaves. What does that mean for KD? I think people knew it was kind of a possibility, but I don't think this is a thing people woke up this morning. Organizations woke up fully prepared for Kevin Durant to be available. I think it's a thing that threw a wrench into the system at the 11th hour.
I'm with you. I know that the Heat were preparing for, excuse me, the Heat were preparing for Kevin Durant to make a run when all the Kyrie stuff was happening, and then Kyrie opted in. The Heat's front office just paused. They just sort of paused their Kevin. Like they didn't put their notes in the trash can, but they just sort of filed them away.
Right.
And in the case that maybe it happens down the road, and then everybody wakes up, and a couple hours before free agency starts, Kevin Durant's like, yeah, you know what? I actually do want to be traded, and puts that phone call into Joe Tsai. And I think teams did just sort of kind of bring their notebooks out again and flip right back to the page. And like, okay, what were we going to do for Kevin Durant? Let's get back onto this thing. I'm a little surprised by how quickly some of this other free agency stuff moved, considering that it felt like Kevin Durant just like threw this grenade into the middle of free agency. A lot of other moves did get made. So I don't know. I really don't know how many realistic destinations there are for Kevin Durant, considering what's already been done in free agency and what kind of teams are looking to acquire Kevin Durant. Like Toronto has been a name that's been thrown out there. Like, would they move Scotty Barnes for Kevin Durant? I don't know. Like Kevin Durant plus Pascal Siakam plus Fred VanVleet. That's a really interesting trio. Does Toronto want to just kind of give up their future for Kevin Durant and try to win a couple championships in the next 4 years? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. I have no idea.
All right.
So, all right. Coming up, the Knicks get their point guard finally, but how big of a difference would Jalen Brunson really make? But first, today's episode is brought to you by Arcade 1UP. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1UP, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. Yeah, just like those old-style arcade machines where you used to play NBA Jam. This one with a big old Shaquille O'Neal on it. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, free throws, no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one, up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1UP is the place for fun. They've also got more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $3.99. Check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. Giving it away. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/lockedon. You've got until July 8th to enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? We'll discuss the Lakers' new approach to building a team around LeBron in a minute. But let's go to New York, where Jalen Brunson will sign a 4-year, $104 million deal with the New York Knicks. He canceled his meeting with the Mavericks, never got the meeting that he claimed that he was going to have with the Heat. And so Brunson ends up where we all expected him to end up without much friction at all. Adam, your thoughts on the deal now that it's basically done?
I mean, what friction is there to be had with a deal that size? $110 million? Isn't that the reported number? $110 million over 4 years. Don't know. You need a lot of friction. We all know he wanted to be in New York. I think those rumors were popping up as early as a year ago. And that price point, I mean, everybody I think has already discussed this because again, this was news that came out a couple of days ago. This was a thing likely to happen. It's a lot of money for a guy in Jalen Brunson, who I love. I think is really good, but that hits cornerstone piece type money, and I don't see him that way. But it's interesting. I actually think it's more interesting for Dallas than it is for the Knicks, and just in that this was one of those deals that put Dallas behind the 8 ball because you needed Brunson in some capacity. You just didn't need him at that price, and losing your own players in that way hurts more.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that way, but my thoughts are good for Jalen Brunson. Classic Knicks. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, sucks for Dallas. When you let your own homegrown guy that you got in the second round walk away for nothing, that it's really hard to just sort of replace that, especially when you consider the Mavericks' recent draft history, which has not been great. Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic are basically their only successful draft picks recently. And so it's really tough. Yeah, you got Spencer Dinwiddie, you've got maybe Tim Hardaway coming back, you've got maybe Goran Dragic involved, reports that he could end up in Dallas. So you've got some short-term solutions, but long-term, it's so hard to replace something like that when a second-round pick that hits that way walks away for nothing. Also, one of these reasons why I think the heliocentric stuff with Luka Doncic, everybody will argue, your offense is always better when the ball is in Luka's hands. But this is why you kind of want more ball movement, more sharing, more egalitarian kind of styles, because maybe if you have that, Jalen Brunson doesn't feel like he needs to go explore greener pastures. I don't know, just a thought. But
sometimes I will say sometimes players just want larger roles. I mean, we've seen this with Jeremy Grant, now OG Anunoby, guys who I think are actually – and here's what's funny. Jalen Brunson, maybe he proves us wrong, by the way, but he says that there's more to his game that he hasn't been able to show. I feel like he was in the perfect role for his talents. That really helped him. He's in the Western Conference Finals. I think that's the best use of him, but I do like your point about maybe that just rubs players where there's like a shelf life, especially for young players for that. It certainly feels that way. In this instance, I feel like it's more a player mischaracterizing what they're best at. But hey, if someone's going to give you $110 million to prove everyone wrong, you take it.
Yeah, the downside of it is not that bad.
Right.
I'm going to swerve here. I know that we all like to make fun of the Knicks, and I do too. Nobody likes to make fun of the Knicks more than I do. But I kind of like this. I kind of like this for New York. The more I've thought about it, they have had 0 good point guards over the last 20 years. I don't know. Like the best one that comes to mind is like Pablo Prigioni. It's a slight exaggeration, but you know what I mean? Like this is not a team that is decorated with great point guards over the last few years. They've sort of been searching for this signal caller over for a long time. And you're trying to get the most out of young guys like RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin and these other guys to have just like an adult on the room. And I know Jalen Brunson's young, but he plays a mature game. He's just a natural sort of traditional point guard. He's obviously a good isolation scorer, really good finisher, but he plays hard. You hear about the leadership skills and all this stuff. I actually think he's a good fit. You had to overpay, yeah, but you have him now in place, and I think he'll help raise the games of your other young pieces. And potentially be the kind of guy that, all right, you get a year of kind of making it your team, but then eventually maybe RJ Barrett blossoms into that star that you hoped he'd do it. Or maybe there's another star out there that sees Jalen Brunson leading this offense and says, hey, boy, I could really be a part of that. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, sure.
It's just an easy thing, and it's an easy fit, and it's just an adult in the room on a Knicks team that felt like it needed one.
This just feels like a really low bar. I mean, yes, like
admittedly it is a low bar.
When you say he's a good point guard, I agree he's a good point guard. It's a league full of good point guards. I don't know where he ranks. If we were just to say where does he rank there, he's certainly not like a top 5 point guard. He's not one of those. And then when you talk about, the goal is to win a championship, does that move bring you closer? The only thing I will say about in terms of moving it closer is I think analysts, especially like fanalists, people that enjoy watching the game or this or that, I think they overstate the idea of like it's not good to be in the middle. I think it's bad to like aim to like cap out at the middle. But I actually think, and Miami's a good example of this, you don't always have to completely bottom out, gut everything, suffer through a slow climb, and then get back to the top. Sometimes you can actually get to the middle, and it allows you the flexibility to trade pieces around and get a lot better. And the Knicks might end up being a team that is like a 6 seed, 5 seed, whatever, but it raises the value of enough of these other players because all of a sudden they're in the spotlight, they're on a good team, they're in good roles, and all of a sudden they're able to pivot from that into a completely different version of a team that is a 1 or 2 seed. So maybe that's the hope. But I certainly look at this move and feel like at best it's a step 1 of a further process that will finalize as something completely different.
Oh, for sure. You mentioned the goal is winning a championship. I think for the Knicks, the goal is just get into the play-in tournament for now. Let's start small, baby steps. As expected, Bradley Beal signed a 5-year, $251 million extension with the Wizards. Feels like one of those deals that Washington had to make. Bradley Beal had to sign because it's a lot of money. But he's going to be making a ton of money on the back end of this thing when he's 34 years old. What do you think about this extension?
Which one was this one again?
Bradley Beal, 5 years, $251 million.
So I actually think that they had a pretty interesting little offseason here with Washington. Like they had some interesting things happen. Obviously, they signed DeLon Wright as well, got him on what I thought was pretty, decent value. They brought in Monte Morris as well. You get Will Barton, who's from Baltimore, so maybe you get like a little bit of something extra out of him as he's a sort of a homecoming of sorts. This is a team with a new coach in Wes Unseld Jr. Went through his rookie season, looked like maybe they were spinning the wheels. Maybe Bradley Beal was going to go, maybe, whatever. And I look at it and I go, this is perfect. Bradley Beal's a great player. You get him on this contract. What is it, rich? Sure, but he's a good player. He's a superstar. And if it doesn't work out, you could pivot from him. But I kind of feel like giving him not just 1, but now 2 point guards and Monte Morris and DeLon Wright. He'll always be on the court with a traditional point guard. I feel like that makes sense. And it's a really good – I'm not in on Washington to be a great team, but I'm in on them being like a step away from being a great team, which they felt like they were a step away from imploding. So to kind of rebound all the way back to that, I'm intrigued by them.
I mean, Beal had to take the money. It's a lot of money. That's why everybody in the league expected him to take it. I don't know. It kind of feels like Bradley Beal to me is like a number 2 on a good team, and you're paying him number 1 money. And it really hinders you from a cap flexibility standpoint. But again, I don't know what the other option for just let him go away, let him walk away. Like that's
aren't
not
we seeing
a feasible
this
thing
all over the place? Like this is the thing about the NBA is that really you win championships by getting guys on discounts. So you get great players on discounts. And often when you have a homegrown talent, a la Bradley Beal, you end up having to pay him an enormous amount of money. I mean, the Nuggets are just committed the richest contract in NBA history to Nikola Jokic. Is he worth it? He's a 2-time MVP.
Well, he's worth it.
No question.
He's a 2-time MVP. Bradley Beal, not a 2-time MVP. But I wanted to ask you about the Jokic thing. I mean, what does this mean for the Nuggets? I mean, obviously it means that Jokic is staying, which I don't think anybody expected that to be different. But
well, first of all, I don't know if anyone's told Jokic that he has the contract yet. Nobody's heard or seen from him. There's no pictures. Serbia played a friendly today, I believe, in Latvia. He was not in attendance. Who knows where he's at? But what it means is, Denver has the security of knowing him. I think they knew this all along. He's come out and said it. This was the least tense a supermax has ever been negotiated. Usually there's some kind of posturing or what have you. This was one like he unprovokingly said, hey, if they give me a supermax, I'll sign it right away. They offered it to him. He agrees to it right away. Boom. So, it provides Denver stability. I don't think it is 5-year stability the way he signs a contract. We've been around the NBA the last decade. We know this. Denver has to produce for him to feel comfortable staying. But it at least gives you confidence that, hey, you got this guy locked up for a while. He's along for the ride. He likes the direction. As long as he continues to like it, you've got your guy. But like Bradley Beal, this is a contract that is so large that it does make you wonder. It's not just a regular max, super max. It's a little bit extra an ownership has to pay. And it does factor into things at some point. And that's why I say it's so hard in the NBA with some of these, like Bradley Beal. Is he overpaid? Sure. But you have to give it to him.
You have to give it to him. We've already seen Denver make a couple of cost-cutting moves already, right? In anticipation of maybe the Supermax, but now's the time, right, to make the most out of it, especially before the Supermax really kicks in, I guess. But
the Nuggets need to spend money right now. I mean, they've had a very weird offseason. they end up signing DeAndre Jordan. As the clock struck 6 o'clock Eastern time, it was
Got their guy.
outside of the Jokic Supermax. It was the next move, I think, within 5 minutes. A very bizarre move. I don't know if there was a really hot market for DeAndre Jordan, but they got that done right away. But yes, they did make some cost-cutting moves, and it makes you wonder, are they going to dip into the luxury tax? They are going to dip into the luxury tax, but when you have a 2-time MVP at the height of his prime, you go deep into the tax. You use all of the resources to your advantage, and Denver so far has not done that. They still have a taxpayer MLE that they don't have assigned to anyone just yet. They also have a $9 million traded player exception they have not used yet. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Clock is ticking for them for sure.
Just a few more. Ja Morant, he signs his extension. Devin Booker, his max extension. Karl Anthony Towns, his max extension. All the guys are sending their max extensions, but none quite as large as Nikola Jokic. I don't think his life changes at all, by the way. Like, what is he buying with this? I don't know.
I've honestly asked this question because when you sign like a $50 million deal, you get a new car, you get a new house, you get these things. When you sign a $270 million deal, like, the only point of that kind of money is to invest it. And I don't think Yoke wants to invest his money.
No, let's hope he does. I don't know. You set up the rest, like your family never has to work again. Your grandkids, grandkids never have to work
already
again.
taken care of. That was already taken. I'm telling you, now you have money that you have to like put it places. I don't know. Am I going to buy a soccer team or something? I don't know what Yoke's going to do. There's only so many horses you can buy.
I know there are only so many horses. There's a finite amount of horses, and he could buy all of them. We're going to talk about our other favorite free agent signings here in a minute. But first, BetOnline.net is your #1 source for all of your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including Major League Baseball news and betting lines. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. It's BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's quickly go through some of the other deals that got done Thursday night. I want to start with the Lakers. They add Lonnie Walker, Damian Jones, Troy Brown Jr., Juan Toscano-Anderson, all on smaller kind of deals. They do lose Malik Monk to the Sacramento Kings. Got a nice little payday for him. My takeaway on the Lakers, at least they're getting young guys. At least they're just not going after the dudes with their pictures signed on the on the weird like barbershop from like 30 years ago. They're just signing young guys who kind of make sense and sort of fit.
It is an interesting one because we've seen a lot of players in a competitive market take discount deals to go to the Lakers. Troy Brown Jr., Juan Toscano-Anderson, Damian Jones, Lonnie Walker, I guess, was a discount. I think Lonnie Walker maybe could have found a little bit extra money on the open market. That was an interesting assignment. But those other three guys, those were guys that were only going to get those minimum deals anyway. So I look at this and I go, the Lakers were in a compromised spot, as was every team that was counting on free agency to be a win. They're looking at guys and thinking they're not that good, but we got to have them. The Lakers just ended up signing 3 of those guys. One just kind of Anderson wasn't playing for the Warriors. Troy Brown Jr. wasn't playing. So yeah, they got some guys that can play, but not necessarily guys that are going to be impact players, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah, good for the Lakers, I guess. Let's get to some other ones, really, just like lightning round kind of stuff. Just tell me, like, quick thoughts on what you think of these signings. PJ Tucker to Philadelphia, 3 years, $33.2 million. What do you think?
Interesting. He's a really good player. He obviously still had a lot in the tank, being with 2 consecutive conference finals teams, 1 champion, of course. So he still has something in the tank, but to win, this is a 3-year deal. The guy's my age. 3-year deal. Like, I'm not making plans 3 years. I'm not making athletic plans 3 years in the future. I'm not signing up for a marathon 3 years from now. So it's a little bit of a crazy. I think all of Philadelphia's moves are those types of moves where you go, if it doesn't work right away, they're looking at a really ugly scenario in short order.
If I gave you $10 million right now to run a marathon 3 years from now, would you do it? Yeah, you would. So no, I actually kind of like this for Philly. They're acting like a team that feels like they're a piece away from getting to the finals. I kind of like that. It's a little bit of chutzpah with them. I like it. I know that you just got embarrassed in the second round with Miami. But hey, you've got an MVP candidate in Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
You've got a superstar in James Harden who you hope will be back and better this next season. You've added some other pieces. You traded a draft pick for D'Anthony Melton on draft night. You've gotten PJ Tucker. You're making the moves on the margins to try to get yourself off. I like it. I like going for it.
Daniel House, by the way, is one of the better deals. Like $8 million over 2 years, $4 million a year, basically. Like he's worth more than that. When you're talking about everybody needs a little bit of 3-and-D. But here's what their team is. Daryl Morey only builds boring teams. You're going to have Joel Embiid isolating, and you don't have any place you can help off. You've got shooters all around, 3-and-D players all around the perimeter. You got James Harden isolating at the top of the key. You can't help off. You got shooters all around. They're just going to play this two-man game where everybody else stands there and is capable to knock down shots, and it's going to be really boring and extremely effective, and you're probably going to finally get the MVP for Joel Embiid.
Kyle Anderson to Minnesota, 2 years, $18 million. I like it. What about you?
I love it. It's a fantastic. It's like a match made in heaven. He's a high IQ player, a connecting piece. They need it out there. They've got some star talent. I think he's going to be very good there. They retain Taurean Prince. Like they have some. Minnesota is a team that I think is primed to take a leap next season, like a meaningful leap next season, and maybe pull a Memphis Grizzlies and surprise some people with how high they climb.
The Nets re-signed Patty Mills and Nick Claxton. They traded for Royce O'Neal basically as soon as the Kevin Durant news dropped. So that happened, I guess. Unless you have an opinion on that, we'll just keep moving on.
I don't.
JaVale McGee signs with the Dallas Mavericks. Reporting around that is that he might be their starting center, and you have Christian Wood as your power forward. I don't mind JaVale McGee in Dallas. It was kind of a rich 3-year deal, but he's a guy. That's an upgrade.
It was a rich
right
deal.
now.
That's what's so interesting. I mean, you knew what their formula was. They wanted Rudy Gobert, maybe DeAndre Ayton. Like they want a guy that they can roll to the rim and provide that rim gravity for Luka Doncic. It is a bit of a departure from where they've had. Now they've had the Christian Wood types before, and like a Powell, for example. But this is a departure where you go back to that 1-5 instead of a 5 out. I think it'll work because Luka Doncic is that special and JaVale McGee is that athletic that his rim gravity is really, really tough to deal with. But it is, I do think of the 5-out Mavs of this year were probably the better version, and the Jalen Brunson thing, as we talked about, I think it's a step back still, even with JaVale.
Yeah. I mean, if it doesn't work out, you just bring him off the bench. Christian Wood starts again, and you go back to the 5 out, and at least you just have the option of JaVale McGee, which you didn't have before, the verticality that you're talking about.
We're coming up on, by the way, 10 years. It was the 2013 playoffs where JaVale McGee had one good playoff game, and it earned him a giant contract. Like,
and he's stuck in the NBA ever since.
He's been in the NBA, and everybody's still betting on him, and he's a good player.
Bobby Portis back in Milwaukee, 4 years, $49 million, right in line with what people were reporting and expected. They also add Joe Ingles to a 1-year deal. I'm not sure about the value on that, but a good veteran player makes sense for them, I think.
$6.5 million. He's hurt. He's probably going to miss half the season. This is a smart play. This is a really smart play. When you are a team like Milwaukee, you know who you are. You know who you're going to – October, November, December, January, February. Those are survive months. You're not going to have him available for most of that, if not all of that. That's fine. Guess what Joe Ingles is? A guy you can count on in the playoffs to make the right plays, guard his position, play team defense, and knock down open threes. It's a great play. You pay for a full season, even though you only get 2 months of him. I thought it was the perfect spot for him.
It's the 2 months that matter, right? For a team like Milwaukee. Tyus Jones goes back to Memphis, 2 years, $30 million. Little surprising, but I thought it was really smart for the Grizzlies to lock up their backup point guard.
That's a lot of money.
It is. Tradable. Tyus Jones was wanted on the market. You could trade him. Nick Batum back to the Clippers, 2 years, $22 million. Amir Coffey back to the Clippers, 3 years, $11 million. What do you think?
I mean, here's what I think is just talking to some people around the league. Ballmer has opened up the checkbook. Like, this guy does not appear to be concerned about spending money. And I think Amir Coffey, when you talk again about 3-and-D type players, Amir Coffey fits that role. Everybody wants one. So how is it that he ended up signing this deal for so cheap to, oh, by the way, go back and be buried on a bench where he might not be in the rotation on some nights? 3 years, $11 million. Are there not 20 teams around the league that could have taken a flyer at that price on a guy there that, hey, we don't need you to necessarily make every shot, but can you just be a threat to make shots and guard your position and use your length? I think there's a lot of teams that could have fit that bill, but he's a restricted free agent. And I just wonder, when Ballmer says, I'm willing to spend whatever. I wonder how many organizations look around and say, we can't make a restricted free agency offer to a Clippers player because Ballmer will just match it and it'll waste 48 hours of our time.
That's really interesting. I mean, Ballmer and Lakeup are just operating in almost a different NBA right now with the amount of money that they're spending. Marvin Bagley resigns with Detroit, 3 years, $37 million. The Pistons love Marvin Bagley, I guess.
So Kevin Knox is the Marvin Bagley of small forwards. They also have him. I just love it, man. You take all of the busts, you take all of these busts that have like the physical tools, you just redraft them. You go back to your draft notes and you're like, real physical profile, moves smoothly. I like it. What was the problem again? Oh yeah, everything else.
Anthony Simons extends in Portland, 4 years, $100 million. I like it. I like it for Portland.
Really?
Lock him up. $20 million a year or $25 million a year is rich. But if you're trying to win with Damian Lillard right now and you're trying to show him, hey, we're investing and this guy took a leap last year, it's one of these things where you just sort of have to do it.
Can you win in the playoffs with Anthony Simons and Damian Lillard on the court together? Defensively, is that guarding anyone?
Probably not. I think if there was a model for it, it's like staggering the way that Golden State did with Steph Curry and Jordan Poole. Now, I know that's not an exact kind of thing, but if you're Portland, maybe that's sort of the idea. You need scoring. And if you don't have Simons, like who's the other scorer on that roster other than Jeremy Grant? Like you need somebody to come off the bench and do stuff. I don't know.
Everybody's fawning over Portland, and I do think they're better. And obviously, Lillard, like not playing last year, depressed how good they actually can be. But I'm just not buying them. I've never been a big Simons guy. I don't think they're a good team.
Again, I get why you do this. You kind of have to. You can't just let a good young player walk away from nothing. Fit and defensive concerns, whatever they are.
Right.
But whatever. Another extension, Lou Dort, OKC, 5 years, $87.5 million. Makes sense. Good for him.
A little surprising though. I mean, we just talk about all of the guards that they have there that you want playing minutes, there's actually like 6 or 7 of them. So that's the only thing I thought there is this looks like a deal that gets moved next year at the deadline and maybe even swings the playoff race.
Last one I have for you, Isaiah Hartenstein to the Knicks, 2 years, $16 million. I kind of like this for the Knicks.
Huge Isaiah Hartenstein fan. Great value. $8 million a year over 2 years. He's going to outperform that contract. I don't love all the other things the Knicks are doing. Here's what I'll say. You know what? They might have themselves a nice little starting five. I think that Hartenstein is going to be the third best player on that team overall next year. There's one for a hot take for you.
There you go. I like it. I don't disagree with it. All right. A lot more free agency news to come. We only got to probably 80% of what actually happened, but that's it for us today. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On NBA wherever you listen to podcasts for 30 minutes of the NBA's top stories every day. Until next Friday, you can find me over at Locked On Heat. Adam is over on Locked On Nuggets. Thank you for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Have a great weekend, Adam.